All right, joining me for this very special episode is a return visitor to the channel, Captain Scott Kelly. If you guys have not seen the From Fighter Pilot to Astronaut episode, check it out. And in that episode, we document the fact that we flew together in VF-143, which is why I'm wearing this swag. But you may know that Scott went on to be an astronaut. Until very recently, he held the record for time on the International Space Station. Scott, I want to say that was 340 some days.
Yeah, at one time. I had the longest.
Yeah, but overall, you have the most days cumulative?
Nope, not anymore.
Oh, okay. That's what was broken? Is that the record that was broken?
And they're made to be broken. Yeah, both of those. Yes.
Very gracious of you to say that, made to be broken. And then joining us from Ukraine, from Kyiv, is Rebecca Maturowski. And we want to talk about Rebecca's journey from being nurse in Colorado to being over in Ukraine and helping civilians and others alike. So, Rebecca, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you wound up over in Ukraine and what's going on over there.
So my background is nursing, and I'm a registered nurse in the United States, and have worked overseas in other countries, no active war zones until Ukraine, and saw what was happening in March, and had been watching on the news, was employed in Colorado, and I had seen that the Ukrainian Ministry of Health had made an appeal to doctors and nurses to see if they could come and help in Ukraine. So I wrote to the Ministry of Health and I said, here's a long shot, but I'm a nurse in the United States and I'm wondering if you guys could use me. And they wrote back and said, yes, we could. So I got on a plane to Poland and I came over and found a volunteer paramedic battalion called the Hospitalliers. And they have been doing combat evacuations along with citizen evacuations since 2014. And so I joined up with them and started rotations out in the East and was able to help them with some pretty gnarly situations in which we had military and civilian casualties alike.
Did they ask you, are you willing to go to combat? Was that one of the questions, or are they just like, look, if you're not willing to go to combat, then we don't need you? How did that matrix go?
The Hospitalliers Battalion they have been working in combat zones since 2014. So it is assumed if you want to join the battalion, you are ready to go into combat zones because they're not sitting around in the West and just, twiddling their thumbs. They are providing evacuation for the front lines. So yeah, it was expected that when I joined them, I would be willing and able to work in not so safe places.
We'll go into detail about some of what you've experienced, but again, you're a nurse in Colorado and now you're a combat medic. And that was just fine.
So I did a lot of training about care under fire. I started to learn how to read and write in Ukrainian so I could identify signs and medications and learn how to speak on the radio when I'm getting evacuation calls. That was very important. So I'm not just sitting there as like the American that's maybe a hazard to everyone that I'm with. So it was a little bit of a learning curve.
Yeah, no doubt. So we won't hazard any OPSEC, but can you tell us about some of your experiences on the front lines?
So this is definitely an adjustment. I have spent the most of my time in the Donbass, and what I witnessed was really total devastation. You're not only under threat of rocket attacks, but also artillery fire. And the villages I was working in were, for the most part, evacuated. But there are always residents that stay. They may not be feel that they're young enough or mobile enough to leave the village. We would go and ask, say, this is a very dangerous place. Can we help you get out? And a lot of them would evacuate, but there are always a few that stay. So in addition to providing medical evacuation for the troops, I also had my, village residency where I would go around and make sure that the few remaining villagers were okay. One thing that was really remarkable to me and still is the fact that the targets of these attacks are really not just military sites. They could be someone's house, someone's barn. So many civilians are involved in the fallout, and it's horrible. It's horrible. I think you expect to some degree that military units and military personnel will be attacked, but when you have someone's mother, someone's child, someone's brother and sister that are wounded and killed as a result of these attacks, that's not something you ever get used to. It feels very inhuman. It feels very wrong. But you can only provide medical aid. You can only really deal with the fallout there. I can't do anything to prevent it. I just try to do what I can to get them to safety.
So the general nature of the wounds that you're attending to are these, um, from artillery shell blasts or rocket attacks, or what sort of injuries are you seeing mostly?
I'm seeing wounds that reflect really heinous. We could have cluster ammunition, which is not right. We have been attacked with phosphorus, which is something that I had only read about and thought for sure that this is not true. They're not really using phosphorus. And the first time I saw it, I felt sick to my stomach. I felt like I was in a nightmare. And these are heinous, heinous wounds. If you know anything about them, it's almost like a fire that you cannot put out. And you have limited resources too, right? Ambulances, for instance, that we're using are always camouflaged because medical personnel and medical vehicles have become a huge target. You shouldn't have to camouflage an ambulance. You shouldn't have to, right? There should be that basic human nature that, okay, this is a medic, this is medical services they're coming to, but they have become a target.
So that's a nice segue to bring Scott into the conversation. Scott, talk to us about your trip over there and the charity that you've set up that has to do with ambulances.
Yeah, so I got involved in this war from my home in the United States. Not like Rebecca has, certainly, but right from the very beginning, because I have for a number of reasons. I have some Ukrainian American family members. I have some Ukrainian friends. My Russian language teacher is from Kharkiv. He's a very good friend of mine. Um, and I'm a big believer in freedom and democracy. And I think it's the obligation of the United States not only to defend our own freedom, but to defend the concept around the world. Because if we don't, we're going to lose it. And it's the most important thing, I think, most important to me at least, is the freedom to do what you believe, to have your human rights. Freedom of speech. I've traveled around the world, many places, including I've spent a lot of time in Russia, more than any other country besides the U.S. And I know what it's like to live in a country where you are not free. So I got engaged very early in this, and then a guy named Dmitry Rogozin, who was the head of the Russian Space Agency at the time, he started just tweeting absolute craziness that was about nuclear war and attacking the United States and Britain and Europe with nukes, but also threatening to leave American astronauts that they were responsible for on board the International Space Station. So I felt obligated to use my platform that I have on social media that has a lot of followers. I knew I would get a lot of attention um, because I did it in a way that was very insulting to him. And it worked. He took the bait. We engaged. Eventually, I sent my medal that I got from the Russian government, Medal of Merit for space exploration. I sent it back to the Russian government, told them I didn't want it. I sent it to Medvedev, told him to give it to the Russian mother whose son died in this unjust and illegal war. So, I just felt this strong obligation to speak up. And then had the opportunity to raise some money just completely on my own, selling NFTs, which is that non fungible token that exists on the blockchain, Ethereum blockchain particularly, and raised $500,000. And I gave it all to this organization called the Global Empowerment Mission. I would imagine Rebecca may have seen those folks around in Ukraine. They're an incredible charity. They only spend 10% of their money on overhead, which is great. Yeah, and then in the fall, the Ukrainian government reached out to me and said, "Hey, we've noticed your advocacy. President Zelensky liked, in the way he put it, is how I trolled a Russian propagandist into oblivion. He almost was blown up into oblivion because after he got fired from Roscosmos, he went to Ukraine and got his ass blown up, literally. He's still alive, but yeah. So they asked me to if I'd be interested in helping them raise money. They gave me some options. The ambulance one for me felt organic because as I was a kid, I was a volunteer EMT. Eventually, I was working in Jersey City, which is a pretty urban environment, where we, nothing like a war zone, but we did have, gunshot wounds, stabbings, car accidents, a lot of medical emergencies. I did that a little bit while I was in college and in the summers and such. Um, so I thought, raising money to buy ambulances was kind of a nice fit for me. Russia destroys 10 of these a week. And like Rebecca said, they are targets targeted by the Russian government, the Russian military, which is a war crime. But they actively try to do that. When you're fighting a war with a country, at least the military, that has no moral compass, no values, no respect for human life of any kind, including their own soldiers, by the way. So anyway, I believe in leadership by example. So I bought the first ambulance myself, which is $65,000, which is not an insignificant amount of money for me. But hopefully other people would follow along. And I think there's definitely a need, and I'm still trying to raise more money for these ambulances to support people like Rebecca in saving lives of innocents in Ukraine that are affected. Their lives are being destroyed by Russia in this war.
To that point, Rebecca, you're in Kyiv now. I guess, do you get is this like R&R where you get to come back from the front lines and sort of chill out for a little bit and then you go back? How does that work? And then how long do you
Yeah,
expect to be over there?
this is certainly a little bit of R&R for me, and an opportunity for me to restock on medical supplies and equipment that I can then take back with me to the East. I don't know how long I'll stay here. I don't have a work visa, so I do have to exit the country every 90 days, whether it be just going over to Poland and getting more supplies there and then re-entering. I've made it work. But to Scott's point, this donation and fundraising for ambulances is so important. And a personal story is that over half the units I've served and been a part of medical evacuations for, previously to my arrival with my ambulance, they have not had any. So I shouldn't have to tell you here, there should never be casualties and civilians that are wounded that should be evacuated in pickup trucks. But this happens all the time because there is nothing else to evacuate them with. So thank you, Scott, for purchasing that $65,000 ambulance. I can tell you right now, it's 100% being used for good.
We have trouble here stateside with our mixed news sources on getting a read on a couple of things. One is the morale of the citizens, in particularly the Donbass, on the front lines. Your sense of winning or losing, and how long do you think the populace is willing to endure this before there's some demands made on the Zelensky government for some sort of, I don't know, compromise or something? What's your sense of the resilience of the population over there?
Well, they're by far the most resilient and courageous people I've ever met. And this is one of the reasons I can't and don't want to leave. When I see the fortitude that they possess every single day going through this scenario. I'm American. I can leave at any time and go back to my country and be in peace and quiet and not be under the threat of attack. But they cannot. And they continue to persevere. And this is absolutely remarkable to me. I don't know how long this conflict will last without maybe negotiations coming to the table, or, as you said, like some kind of demand on peace talks. But what I do know is that the resilience of this people is unmatched. The resilience of the troops are unmatched. But the longer it takes for them to get the supplies that they need, the longer this is going to be dragged out.
I wanted to ask you one question. We were talking about needs. So clearly, ambulances are incredibly important. You explained that, sometimes you're evacuating people in pickup trucks or cars. Sometimes the ambulance you get, although are generous donations of used equipment, they don't completely fulfill your need. Other medical supplies. A big topic right now in the U.S. Is the Starlink satellites and how SpaceX has kind of throttled the capability down to where they can't be used. It's almost like there's some. I've heard some reports of like geofencing, so beyond where the Ukrainian front would be, you couldn't use them beyond that, even though it's still in Ukraine, but also affecting the ability of the Ukrainian military to use them for precision employment of artillery or tanks or whatever forces. And I've been personally in a little online Twitter discussion with Elon Musk about this, trying to convince him the importance of turning this back on. He cites,
yes,
this escalatory, but it just enrages me that someone would claim that precision defense in your own country is somehow an offensive or escalatory capability. My question to you, though, is, what is your experience with Starlink?
I cannot describe to you what it is like to be in the East with no communication with anyone. You cannot speak to headquarters. You can't speak to people on the position unless you have, at some points, one model radio that we can use. So even when you're getting a call to do an evacuation, we have had at times no communications, where we just go and we're sitting at the evacuation point under fire, waiting for them to bring us the casualties, and we cannot communicate. Starlink has enabled so many frontline troops to be able to communicate with each other, and this prevents loss of life, right? When you can actually speak with each other, because otherwise you're cut off completely.
If I had the opportunity to talk to Elon in person about this, I would, try to use some analogy. Like, someone's breaking into your house to kill your whole family. Do you not use the most precise weapon you have, or do you go for, do you go to the garage and get the baseball bat? I mean, no, you're going to use
No.
the best capability you have to defend your family, your children, your country. And, as long as you're using it for those reasons, it's not escalatory. My understanding about Putin, I've never met him. I've talked to him before when I was in space. After my sister-in-law was shot in the head, a couple days after, we had a conference call with him. And surprisingly asked me if there's anything he could ever do for me and my family, just ask. And I actually did a while back on Twitter. He didn't listen to me, but anyway, my understanding of Putin is the only way he will back down is to be defeated decisively on the battlefield. The way you escalate this conflict is to do things like Elon is doing by limiting the ability of Ukraine to defend themselves. That's where the escalation comes from. It's not from giving them the capability. The escalation comes from taking it away, specifically when they have had this capability for months. And all of a sudden, in the most critical time, arguably, you might argue the beginning was very critical too, and this is cut off. I appreciate Elon's, donations in the beginning, his support. I am a fan of him as an engineer and a visionary technologist person. But this particular action, I think, is egregious.
And when you talk about precision striking, a lot of times the drones can be used for reconnaissance, um, and precision striking to destroy um, ammunition depots, right? And so they're destroying weapons that will be used against us. And now you're taking away the ability to even prevent attacks on us.
As Ward knows, the one great advantage of a precision strike capability is not only are you destroying your enemy, but you're avoiding collateral damage of civilians and innocents, and maybe even Russian
Correct.
ambulances. Maybe
Correct.
you're saving even Russian lives because you're not
Correct.
causing collateral damage for their people that are involved, that are protected by international law and the Geneva Convention.
And as you say, Scott, the timing couldn't be worse, because there's this, and Rebecca probably knows better than we do. There's this threat of an offensive that we thought was going to be in the springtime, but it looks like they may be attempting this sooner rather than later. So the timing isn't good. So Rebecca, as a sort of final thought, how do you think you've changed since your experiences over there?
I think my bandwidth and patience for the mediocre first world problems, so to say, has become limited because I am here in this environment and I desperately want uh, people around the world to care. Because once you see this, and Scott, you know this, once you see what's happening here, you don't forget it. You cannot forget it and you can't unsee it. And I wish I had some way of calling to attention American citizens and international citizens and NATO of what is happening here. Is it not enough you can see it on CNN? Does this not provoke you to want to have some action to help in some way? But it feels like, as you mentioned earlier, they have kind of a limited attention span, and so many things are going on that it was very fashionable and very um, popular back in the spring to be involved and invested in let's stand with Ukraine. And now, interest has been waning, attention has been waning, but this conflict is not. This is still happening day to day. And I think we need to be much more motivated to do everything we can um, to save lives, especially civilians that are being attacked every day.
Well, Rebecca, as a fellow American, let me just say I'm very proud of you. You obviously have a huge heart. Please be safe over there for the balance of your time in country, and hope we get to meet you in person before too long. And Scott, I've always been proud of you. I was proud to fly with you, proud of your time as a NASA astronaut, and I'm as proud of your efforts in support of the Ukrainian people. So we will put the link for the charity in the episode description, and we will keep our eye on this issue whenever it demands it.
Thanks, Ward, and thank you so much, Rebecca, for what you're doing. You're risking your life every day that you're out there, even when you're in Kyiv, a little bit, and it is just such a important issue because not only are you out there helping Ukrainians, but in doing so, you're defending democracy for all of us around the world that believe in freedom. So, thank you.
Thank you both, gentlemen. I appreciate your time. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
All right, that'll do it for this episode. If you're not already a subscriber, click the button and ring the bell so you don't miss anything going forward. If you'd like to help support the channel, please consider using the super thanks, the heart icon below, or become a patron at patreon.com/wardcarroll. In the meantime, I look forward to talking to you again very soon.